One of the things that confuses me about the look of African history is that a lot of it is from the bird's eye view. In other words, what they show are the ruins only. And this is if they have the time to show the ruins. But in real life, we all know that the African civilizations were deeper than this. And they have nothing to do with just the ruins. They also include the people who lived amongst these ruins. Now, of course, these ruins only tell us about the kings and the queens and how they lived. But remember, ordinary people existed, and these ordinary peoples had to survive every day. Everyone could not be a marketer, everyone could not be a slave, everyone could not be a king. So the question is, what did these millions of people do when it came down to making money and selling their trades all day or getting a job? One of the things that they actually participated in, which a lot of people do not understand, is the types of jobs that we have today, like people working delivering messages only that I have talked about in my previous video. And there's a reason why I talk about it, because people in their head, when they think of the Swahili coast, they think of a place of merchandising and trading and all of that. But they do not think of it as an occupied land, as a place where people really thought of it as a metropolis, as a fantasy city. If you read about African cities from actual descriptions of people who lived in these cities, you will see that there are jobs that you would not even expect, but you don't even realize that a lot of their build up or a lot of their foundation came from Africa. For example, like masseuses and of a certain version of chiropractors, not the type of chiropractor that you get in America with the entire ritual, because that's a very specific thing, but a similar thing where people were doing some kind of physical therapy. Because the spirit was considered similar to the body inside of Africa, a lot of rituals, especially ritual anointments and ritual moments, included taking care of the body and making sure that somebody's body is well prepared for things that they will do during the day. This includes, of course, taking care of people's hair. And this led to, when organized in the Swahili coast, into full areas where you could pay to have these things happen, and you could be in a privileged position more than other people. Unfortunately, when the Europeans came, they did what they did in a lot of places and turned traditional rituals into local pleasure houses, or even worse than that, turning people who used to be in very high positions. We look at it today like, oh yeah, these pleasure houses or whatever, but people who are in very high positions, ritualistically, they were really doctors, and they turned them into casual S workers. And a lot of this was to escape things like slavery and poverty and stuff like that once the Europeans came. And that's really the point of this video, which is the destabilization of these civilizations was not small. Even though there were some Arab people who lived amongst these people, they never crushed the entire civilization. Did they take slaves? Yes. Did they take them in stupid numbers? Absolutely. But the civilizations themselves were not meant to decay and drown. In fact, when I look at Arabic writings, I see no evidence that in their head they had the idea that they wanted the African civilizations to disappear. In fact, it seems like they wanted to increase their stability. Now, we can talk about things being official and money being passed through hands and all of that as much as we want. But in real life, what we must understand is that there were actually officials in the Swahili coast who passed rules and made things work. So, in other words, if you came with 40 bottles of, or 40 potteries or pots and you wanted to trade them for oils, there would be officials who would say, this is this much, this is this much. It was not the haggling that you would see in the northern side of Africa, where people would make up their own prices. And if you traveled for days and days to go and trade with someone, they could change their mind in 5 seconds. So, yesterday I talked about Shauri. Shauri is a type of thing that would happen, event that would happen, but this event was mixed with ritual ceremonies. And so, this is the thing that people don't really understand, which is in the Swahili coast, a lot of the things that existed today were mixed with the traditional world. And it was not that they knew that they were mixing them. It's just it came with it. It's like if you invented the telephone in ancient Egypt, somehow it would be linked with Thoth because of information. It's like they didn't pull away, and this is how we know they invented it for themselves. So there are trading ports that were set up, and these trading ports, there were officers who were in these areas. These officers made sure that people didn't become slaves who were not supposed to be. They also made sure that, of the trade and all of that. But let's just read it. Negotiations usually went first about the hongo. The traders regarded hongo as something between a duty for passing a ruler's territory and a gift to establish trading relationships. This might also have been the view of African rulers, but the local population also considered it as payment for the service provided to the caravan. The hongo itself was the expression of a moral economy that was negotiated in Shauri. Most traders accepted the duty of paying the hongo. Another question was how much they had to pay and what followed thereafter. Therefore, the Shauri was based on the discourse of the traders about African rulers in the interior. If a local ruler was known to be powerless, the traders tried to beat down the Hongo. Powerful chiefs could prevail with their demands, even if in the eyes of the traders they were obscure and bottomless. The caravan of Solomon B. Mweni Chade Hamzi, which was occupied only a few armed forces, was condemned to fulfill what they considered to be absurd demands. When his caravan arrived at the residence of Makenge of Ugogo, one of most powerful rulers of his time, they were obliged to build defense for his boma, even after they had paid the hongo with plenty of cotton. Solomon B. Mweni's judgment on the ruler's behavior was damning. He accused Makenge of being bottomless in his demands and described him as a shenzi, a barbarian. Sentence to put the African outside of the moral economy of the trade. For the traders, this accusation served to legitimate the use of force against them. Solomon B. Mweni could not afford this, unlike traders with more military potential, such as Tipitip, who contemporary sources state had several thousands of armed followers at his disposal. Even for a man as ruthless and scary as Tiputep, the slave trader, he still had to bow down to the officials of the Swahili coast. He still had to occupy within the rules. Now, of course, like that sentence says, if they tried to overcharge him, he was fully within his rights to use force to try and go through without paying or paying the minimum that you need to go through. But remember, this talks to the organization of these places. And this is only later years. This is not even, the full understanding of how it used to work before it was broken down by the Europeans and turned into something completely different. Because, of course, even Shauri, that used to be more religious, was broken down by the Europeans and turned into some kind of extortion type of thing in order to break the tradition and copy it so that they can use it. And that's one of the things that actually annoys me about these civilizations. So when we talk about the Romans, it's not all slavery. When we talk about the Greeks, it's not all slavery. When we talk about the American Empire, it's not all slavery. When we talk about Europe or England, we talk about what exactly happened within the kingdoms. But it seems like when we go to Africa, the only thing they want to talk about is how can they claim to be moral civilizations when they too themselves engaged in slavery? And I think to myself, is that really how other people see their history too? Since they're saying there must be some kind of equality, is it just master slave territories? Is that really how they conduct themselves when they show documentaries? We know that Genghis Khan had slaves. If you watch a Genghis Khan documentary, is the whole thing just about slavery? I have been watching a lot of African documentaries, and it always surprises me that the first thing that they do is say, this tribe enslaved this tribe. How awful. And those videos get hundreds of thousands of views. I don't know why. Because of course, I think I do know why. I think it's the Europeans trying to distract from their evils in order to reduce the civilizations in Africa. I want to promise you this: African civilizations, though they had slavery, had way more free people and way bigger stories to tell, which they wrote down themselves, especially in the Swahili coast, in Mali. I mean, in Mali, we haven't even touched how many people operate in that way. The Mandinka, the Ghana Empire, all of these people who were literate or had oral history, they speak highly of their civilization. Now, of course, every civilization in the past had some form of serfdom, some level of people who lived underground. But this should not be highlighted over the good things that happened in that civilization. This to me is like bowing down. The second part of it that I've noticed is that they also want to divide and conquer because they're like, well, get angry at these people if they're enslaved you. Get like they try to tell African Americans to get angry at Africans because they supposedly sold them. It's like, yeah, but who sent them to America? Who's the one that actually took them out of the African continent and sent them to America? And here's another divide and conquer strategy when they try to say people from outside of Africa who are part of the diaspora, they say a lot of these people don't even want to be part of Africa. And it's like, well, that's the propaganda working. We have to convince those people that they're part of Africa. I mean, I know some people who are even in Africa don't want to be part of Africa, as far as Egypt, Ethiopia, and all of these people. But first, you must show them, give them pride, show them the civilizations that existed inside so they would want to connect themselves. I remember that Wakanda movie, even though it's fake. I watched some individuals who I used to watch from Africa suddenly have a level of unity, something to unite over. And if we can create more reality and more fiction like that, that can put us in a position to where people can unite, I think the African continent will be safe. When I see the people in Yemen who are living in pure poverty, sometimes I wonder if they even realize that there's places in Africa that would take them that are highly civilized regions. Because you don't really hear about that. You don't hear about Yemenite people coming back. So basically, this video was about the occupations that people had, which I will do a deep dive in inside of the Swahili coast, Mali, and Africa in general, and how they were influenced by the true traditions and the true beginnings. And this always happens, by the way, in any civilization. If you look at China, they start off ritualistic, a building of civilization builds up, and then they start to carry on those traditions, but in a more sophisticated way. Unfortunately, today, a lot of those were taken out by force. And so today we just operate like, oh, this is how the world would look like. The world would look nothing like what it looks like now. It didn't even look like anything it looked like now 120 years ago, 140 years ago. If you go and look back, if you go and look back in the 1800s, where people were, black Africans were living in cities, they were not dressed in suits and all of this stuff. They were dressed traditional while living the exact life of a sophisticated human being. And we need to bring this back.